Every single day, roughly 100,000 tons of cargo per minute squeezed through a stretch of water you've probably never heard of. Oil for factories, food for cities, the phone in your hand, the car in your driveway, the chip inside both. A huge share of it passed through here. At its tightest, this channel is just 1.7 miles wide, narrower than some airport runways are long, and the most powerful rising nation in Earth, a country of 1.4 billion people, has built its entire economic future on the assumption that ships can keep moving through it. The problem? China doesn't control it, and in a single afternoon someone else could close it. To understand why this matters, forget borders for a second and just look at water. If you're a cargo ship loaded with oil from the Middle East, and your destination is China, Japan, or South Korea, you have a problem. Between you and those markets sits one of the largest land masses on the planet, or Southeast Asia. You can't go through it. You have to go around it. And nature has left you almost no good options. There are other gaps. The Sunda Strait, the Lombok Strait. But they're longer, deeper detours that can add days and serious costs to every voyage. So the world's shipping funnels, overwhelmingly, into one place. This is the Strait of Malacca, around 500 miles long, sitting between the Indonesian island of Sumatra and Malaysia, with Singapore guarding its southern mouth. It is the shortest sea route connecting the Indian Ocean to the Pacific, and that one fact, shortest route, has made it the single most important shipping lane on Earth that nobody talks about. Roughly 100,000 ships pass through every year. That's somewhere around a quarter of all the goods traded on the planet, threaded through a passage that, at its narrowest, you could nearly see across on a clear day. Now here's the part that should make any strategist nervous. A waterway this busy and this narrow isn't just valuable, it's fragile. And for one country in particular, that fragility is an existential weakness. Stay with me. Because to see why China loses sleep over this, we have to follow the oil. China is the world's largest importer of crude oil. It runs on energy it does not have enough of underground. So it buys it. From the Middle East, from Africa, and almost all of it arrives by sea. To reach Chinese refineries, those tankers have one efficient way in, through the Strait of Malacca. By most estimates, somewhere around 80% of China's imported oil passes through this single strait. Let that sink in. The fuel that powers Chinese factories, that keeps the lights on in Chinese cities, that moves the second largest economy on Earth. The overwhelming majority of it threads through a gap controlled by no one in Beijing. So ask yourself the question China's own planners ask. What happens if that gap closes? Not closes forever. Closes for a few weeks. Picture it. The tankers stop arriving. China holds strategic oil reserves, yes, but reserves run down. Prices spike. Industries that depend on imported energy start to choke. The cost ripples into everything. Manufacturing, exports, the daily life of over 1 billion people. A blockade here wouldn't need a single missile fired at Chinese soil. It would just need someone to sit at the mouth of the strait and say, nothing gets through. And China knows exactly who could do that. A Chinese leader gave this fear a name over 2 decades ago. They called it the Malacca Dilemma. The dilemma is simple and brutal. China's rise depends on a door it cannot lock, in a house owned by someone else. So what do you do if you're Beijing, and your entire economy hinges on a choke point you can't defend? You start looking for a way around it. And what China has done in response is one of the most ambitious geographic gambles in modern history. 3 escape routes. We'll take them one at a time. Plan 1. If you can't go around Southeast Asia by sea, go through it by land. China built pipelines across Myanmar. Oil and gas lines running from a port on the Bay of Bengal over rugged terrain straight into southern China. The beauty of this is geography. Oil can be offloaded on the Indian Ocean side, before Malacca, and piped overland, completely bypassing the strait. It's clever. But it's not a cure. A pipeline carries only a fraction of what a fleet of supertankers can deliver, and it runs through a country with its own deep instability, a route only as secure as the ground it crosses, so one escape route isn't enough. Which brings us to Plan 2. Plan 2 is bolder. If your weakness is that all your trade enters from the east, give yourself a back door in the west. This is the logic behind one of the most expensive infrastructure projects on the planet. A corridor of roads, railways, and pipelines running from a port in Pakistan up through the mountains into western China. The idea: land oil and goods on the Arabian Sea and move them overland into China, never touching Malacca at all. In one stroke, China gains access to the Indian Ocean from the west, instead of begging to pass through a choke point in the east. Ambitious, enormous, and still only a partial fix. Mountains are hard, pipelines are thin, and this corridor too crosses contested, unstable ground, which is why China keeps coming back to a far more radical idea, one that engineers have dreamed about for over 300 years. What if you didn't go around Southeast Asia or through its mountains? What if you sliced straight through it? Here in southern Thailand, the land narrows to a thin strip. For centuries, people have imagined cutting a canal through it, a shortcut that would let ships skip the Strait of Malacca entirely. A canal here would do for Asia what the Suez and Panama canals did for their regions: rewrite the map of global trade. Ships could cut hundreds of miles in a full day off the journey. And crucially for Beijing, a canal that China helped build, and to finance would be a route where China finally has leverage. So why hasn't it happened? Because the obstacles are staggering. The cost runs to the tens of billions. It would split Thailand, geographically and politically. It could destabilize the region's balance of power, and Singapore, whose entire economy was built on being the gatekeeper of Malacca, has every reason in the world to make sure it never gets dug. So the canal stays a blueprint, a 300-year-old what if. And China is left with the same uncomfortable truth it started with. Every workaround helps a little. None of them solves it. The pipelines are thin, the corridors are fragile, the canal is a dream. The hard reality remains. For the foreseeable future, the bulk of China's lifeblood still has to flow through those 1.7 miles of water. This is why a quiet stretch of water between Sumatra and Malaysia is one of the most strategically loaded places on Earth, because the Malacca dilemma isn't only about trade. It's about what happens if relations break down. In a serious confrontation, a rival naval power wouldn't necessarily attack China directly. It might not need to. It could simply move to control the entrance to the strait and let economics do the rest. Strangle the flow of energy, and you pressure an entire economy without firing on a city. China understands this perfectly, and it's the reason behind something you may have noticed in the headlines for years now. China building one of the largest navies in the world at breathtaking speed. A bigger navy isn't just about projecting power outward. It's about a country that has looked at its own map, found a knife pressed against its supply line, and decided it never wants to be at someone else's mercy again. That's a deeper story here. The Strait of Malacca is where the world's most important economic relationship and its most dangerous rivalry overlap on the same thin line of water. Control the choke point, and you hold leverage over a superpower, lose access to it, and you risk economic standstill. Both sides know it, and that's exactly what makes a narrow, peaceful-looking channel so combustible. Here's a lesson that goes far beyond China. The modern world feels borderless. Goods seem to appear on shelves like magic, but that magic depends on a handful of impossibly narrow passages, choke points, where geography quietly holds the whole system hostage. Malacca is the most consequential of them, but it is not the only one. There's a strait in the Middle East where a fifth of the world's oil passes within firing range of a single hostile coastline. There's a canal where one stuck ship once froze global trade for a week. Each one is a place where a few miles of water can move the entire world economy. We started with the simple idea that the most powerful rising nation on Earth has built its future on a door it cannot lock. Now you know why that keeps its planners awake at night, and why a stretch of water just 1.7 miles wide may be the most important place on the planet that almost no one is watching. Next time we go to the strait that could shut off a fifth of the world's oil, and the single coastline that makes it terrifying. If you want to see how geography quietly rules the global economy, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next choke point.